Hi, everyone. I'm Marla Miller from marlamiller.com, and I'm offering another interview episode of Marla Miller Talks to Authors and Content Creators. And this week I have a writer that I've known for quite a while because she joined my Zoom group when COVID shut the world down. And I'm not really quite sure how I knew her before then, but I've been in the circuit for quite a while, so I'm sure that our paths crossed in several different ways. Victoria Wada was a teacher. I don't know if she still is, she'll tell us, and a librarian. And when she joined our Zoom group in 2020, she had already started a manuscript, I believe, and brought a draft version of that into my Zoom group. And that was a really fabulous group. We have got four writers that have been published authors from that group, and Victoria is one of them. She came in with this story about it's called Keep Sweet, and it's a story about polygamy and about she'll tell you about that big sensation, that guy who was arrested and all of his children and his wives were it made front page news for a long time. And I think maybe the genesis of her storytelling came from there. I'm not sure. But Victoria has been a short story writer for a long time, and she is very active in the Inland Empire, a literary group there that I think she actually has either a staff position or she's president of. She'll tell us. And so she's been writing short stories for a while. I think Keep Sweet is her first novel. I welcome her to Marla Miller Talks to Authors and Content Creators. Welcome, Vic.
Well, thank you, Marla, and thanks for having me. That's a very nice introduction. And I'm just to make clear, I'm not the president of anything, so
Okay.
I don't want to. But
What's the name of that literary organization that you're?
Inlandia, and it does like
Okay.
inland Southern California. It covers a really vast area. Southern California is huge, and inland
Indeed.
Southern California.
Yeah.
People don't think of that so much if they're outside of California. They only think of the coast. But there's a great, huge area and a lot of excellent writers. And so I've been on like different things with them, running workshop, publication committee, things like that. So I have been involved, but not definitely not the president or anything.
Got it.
So just to be
Got it.
clear,
Well, you never
yeah.
know, Vic.
Next, yeah, just
You're
see.
young. You never know
Yeah.
what's going
Oh,
to
yeah.
come down the pike. And
Yeah.
and so let's talk if we can a little bit about because I don't think that we really did this in Zoom much because we were so busy reading and critiquing chapters. And that group lasted for 2.5 years. It's amazing to me. Thank God we had that, and Zoom really became a theme
Became,
because
yeah,
I think it really helped our collective mental health throughout really
absolutely.
the globe. So tell me about this story, where the genesis of it, the roots of the story that you became really devoted to writing.
Okay. Because, and that does go back a little bit to my teaching. So we're talking
Go,
about,
go.
I
Yeah.
have retired from teaching. So
Okay.
I'm not actively teaching now, but I was an English teacher for about 12 years. And then I was a teacher librarian. Went back to school and got a master's degree in library science. And I would do library. And one of the things, of course, we would do a lot is book talking. And, we did a lot about research, but as far as just pleasure reading, there was that aspect too, right? Trying to get kids to read and what they would like and stuff. And so I got kind of involved in this interest in like patriarchy, I guess you would say. A
Yeah.
lot of books that, particularly girls, but that teens like to read, revolved around patriarchy, and some usually there'd be some
Interesting.
like kick butt uh, heroine who was bringing down the patriarchy, and it could be anywhere from the Middle Ages to today. You know what I mean? It could be
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And so some of us also got interested in this whole idea of having like this polygamous group. And so there is this involvement based on a polygamous group that was in the Arizona Utah border
Uh-huh.
called Short Creek. And they had, it was very, very much a patriarchal organization, which actually was not helpful to boys because in order to do it, it was only like really good for in air quotes the the guy who was running it, right?
Sure.
The abuser, the prophet,
Sure, of course.
because the men who were marrying all these women had to take care of these big families. And then, in order to have an even number of, like the men to marry several women, they would throw the boys out. They would just like send them on the road, very young,
I
16
remember
years old.
that in your story.
Yeah, thumb up. And here's
Uh-huh.
how to hitchhike out of here. And so all these boys would just lose their opportunity. They would become alcoholics, just all kinds of things outside. So it was terrible for the girls and the boys. So that's what I decided to have like twins. As the main character really is the girl who was her name was Patricia when we were working on it, but became Elizabeth when the final editor looked at it
Okay.
and said, Patricia's not a name that we use a lot anymore for girls, and Elizabeth has a nice biblical sound, which it does.
Yeah, it
And so
does.
we
Yeah.
went with that. And her brother already had a biblical name, Micah. And so they were the two 14-year-old twins who really are working hard to get this out. But I just included the boys because I wanted to show like how bad things were for them too. It's horrific for the girls, but the boys were not having a really great time. And I was basing it partly on that. And then I wanted to just throw in other aspects of patriarchy. So I decided to make it fiction. And I know in the library, girls would say, would you have something like from the girls with the viewpoint of the girls? And there were nonfiction things by adult women, but
Hmm.
not girls. And you could see kind of like, even now, I think people know on TV. Right now on Netflix just started something that's called Trust Me, but same group, but a new prophet who's in
Amazing.
jail. Um, Samuel Bateman. And he did the same thing at underage girls that he was abusing, sexually abusing, things like that. It was just like the same story all over again.
Can
People
I
trusted
can
him.
I ask you this,
Yeah.
Vic? When that came, I know your book came out in 2025.
Hmm.
Okay.
Almost
When
a
the
year.
Netflix, when that's, I'm assuming it's a series. I haven't seen it yet. When that came out, did you notice an increased interest in your book?
I don't know because I don't really have the numbers. I hate to say this. I don't really have the numbers on my book because it's a small organization, right?
Okay.
Publishing a really small publisher and stuff. So,
Yeah.
um, so I'm not sure, but I know that people have been interested really in the topic, and on I have a Substack, and a lot of people were interested in the subject on Substack. So
Mhm.
I'm hoping that that's like the thing that translates, because
Absolutely.
that's kind of what we're doing is looking at that. I two things on my Substack. I put about books and book bans because of my library thing. That's one half is book and books ban, and the other half is talking about books and including this kind of thing. And so a lot of people who subscribe are people who have been involved in not polygamy, obviously, mostly, but like some kind of patriarchal religious
Sure.
issues.
Well, I mean, it's a hot topic.
It is.
Patriarchy is a hot topic, period, across the
Mhm.
board, across the globe. And finally, so I'm quite pleased about that, even though, we're hearing some hard truths. But we need to hear those hard truths. And your point about girls and boys, I remember when you were in our Zoom, I should tell listeners that Victoria was very devoted to reading a chapter a week. I mean, she came prepared. She was very serious in the group and wanted the feedback that we offered. And like all of us, she didn't always agree with what we had to say. But I think mostly you found that read and critique group helpful to you. One thing that I want to add is that Victoria, because of her background in library sciences, was really helpful to us in terms of, well, I'm not sure that would be a YA, or you would even go a little further and say, YA has really come along. Because there
Mhm.
were a couple of scenes in your book, as I recall, that we wondered about. And you went, well, and you were able to then cite other stories that had, similar material, relevant material that I was surprised young YA readers they would even present it to YA readers. But times have changed, haven't they? Is
Yeah, it's funny that you should just mention that right now because the American Library Association just came
Yeah,
out with like the top books that were banned in
yeah,
2025. And the number one book is Sold by Patricia McCormick. And it's about a girl who sold into like she's sexually trafficked. And there's some very vivid
and they
scenes in
banned
there.
it.
And that's a YA book, and she's a young girl. So those things are. I do say though, as about the group, that because some of it, I didn't want it to be like traumatizing for people because this is
Yeah.
kind of a traumatic story, and the feedback was really good and really helpful because I kept thinking, well, how would I tone that? How would I work that? In a way that we still know what happened to her, but that it's not this vivid, traumatizing thing to the reader. And so by getting the feedback from the group, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to rework this scene. And I really did rework the most traumatic scenes in,
I
I
can
think, a
remember.
way that
Hmm.
you know what was happening with her,
Yeah.
but it wasn't like right on the page. It was like right outside the door, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I think that what we concluded was less is more when you're dealing with a YA audience who have great imaginations. You don't have
Right.
to spell every word out. And so I'm glad that I remember that very well. I'm glad that we were helpful. Can you talk a little bit, Vic, about how you're selling your book? Are you doing it? Are you just letting it just kind of evolve into its
Y-
own form?
I think that I have found a lot on looking at like where people would say, oh, like look at social media. And I think social media is not it doesn't necessarily really like sell book. It's almost like that Billie Eilish thing where you have somebody who's really famous and then they put a book and they don't sell it because they're famous for something else or whatever. So the
Yeah,
people who are not
sure.
famous, not so much. But I do find that Substack really it's fewer people than social media. I
Hmm.
have like 500 and something, well, more followers, but 500 and something subscribers. But they're like active people who
Hmm.
read it. I mean, the reading percentages are really high compared to and comment on it and stuff. So I really like that. And those people get involved and interested in you as a writer. So I'm thinking in terms of writing, if you're looking at other people who are writing, like building a group, right? That
Yeah,
is
sure.
interested in the same thing. I think it really works well because it is a blog, but it has other elements to it as well. And so I've really enjoyed doing that. And I'm really, really consistent. I was doing it twice a week. I do it once a week. I do it every single week, kind of come hell or high water
Good,
kind of a thing.
good.
That. And then I am doing some things where I'll give presentations or something and talk about the book. I know, well, today's Friday and next Friday is I'm going to Lit Fest in the Dina, which is in Pasadena.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm going to be on a
I've
panel
been there. Yeah.
presentation
Good.
with, yeah, some other people. And we're going to talk about this kind of subject about abuse of victims of abuse. And so the panel is like beyond Truman Capote. But what that means is that where a story like In Cold Blood in the old days focused on the abusers, it's
Hmm.
the story of the abusers. These are looking at what is the story of the victims. Where is the victim voice? And so people who have
Cool.
written things, either nonfiction, fiction,
Hmm.
there's even a poet on it, but from the voice of the victim, of the survivor. And so just to be able to talk about that. So that's what I'm trying to do. That's the next one coming up. But just like
Good.
going to things where people are interested in the topic. Yeah.
What you just said really gives me even more hope. I'm feeling very hopeful about the changes in the society at large. And I know that sounds crazy given our particular circumstances, but my belief is that in crisis, it's only when people are in crisis that things change. They either
Absolutely.
get better or they get worse. And for women, and I'd like to think for men, because I have many men in my life that I love, and including 5 grandsons. Um, I don't want them to have to be confined to this very rigid understanding of what makes a male. And so when you talk about presenting in this panel, I mean, have we ever heard about a panel that was designated for the victim's voice, that wanted to, you know, spotlight the victim and what victims are going through. And I consider boys to be victims as well.
Absolutely.
Little boys. I mean, I remember the twin in your story, and how bad we felt for him. And so, where did you get that? So, I have to probe a little bit because that's what I do. I'm nosy.
Mhm.
Where did the idea for this story come from?
I had been reading about people who were in these situations, and particularly this Short Creek. And we had books in the library, and I would book talk them. Like I said, you talk up
Yeah.
things, and so I would book talk them. A lot of kids would check them out. I had like a book club after school, and we would talk about books. So girls would come in and they would say, well, what about this? Like I said, what about the younger people? Now think of it for a second. When you see these things like on Netflix, because I had already come up with the title for the book, Keep Sweet. And then later they had and the book wasn't published yet, but it was in, it takes a long time for a book to get published. I don't know if
Indeed.
people realize like it's a couple of years, right? That
Yeah.
it's working on it. And so, it was Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey was like a Netflix series. And then, like I said, there's one that just came out right now that's called Trust Me. And, they don't have the voices of the youngest. And there's a reason for that. It's nonfiction, right?
Hmm.
These are victims of abuse, and including sexual abuse, things like that. So they blank out their faces, in the pictures,
Yeah.
and they don't tell their names. Or they put a fake face, like in the Trust Me, they're putting like a fake
An
look, and they
avatar
even
of
say this
something.
is
Yeah.
not the real girl.
Hmm.
On anybody who's under 18 years old.
Hmm.
So you don't hear their voices. And so the kids in school are saying, let's hear their voices, and I thought, I want to write that story. I want to write from the voice of the young people, like what they're going through. And like, how do they escape? Because that's something that teens
Interesting.
like a lot is like, how do I engage in order to change the situation? And it's something that can help them in life. I always think that reading is like, when people say, reading saved my life, they're not kidding. Like, I mean, people don't understand that when some people say that, they are not joking.
Hmm.
And so and what I liked about it too was that because it's fiction, that I could look through the way of how these kids, including the boy, because he's getting it too,
Hmm.
are moving through, but then like have like an ugly cry happy ending. Like here's how they do it. Here's what they did. Here's how they seek help from the outside, boom. Yeah. So
I
kind of to
remember
walk
that.
that path. So that was it. It started with the idea in the library, talking to the students, who are looking for a novel and not seeing that novel. I'm gonna write that novel. So there you
Very
go.
cool.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the reasons, again, you're reinforcing why I launched this particular podcast, and that is to listen to the voices of authors who have brought their previous life experience to the page. And the fact that you have been interacting with your readers as a teacher for many years set the framework around this story. And I like to encourage people who are coming into the writing life later that the experiences that they have, that they bring with them, stories grow from those experiences. And I have a Reddit group of young people who I love. I love young people, young writers. When I was the assistant director of the Santa Barbara Writers Conference, I developed a young writers program. We ran it for 5 years. They loved it. The kids loved it. But they, how can I say this? Because they might look at this and get mad at me. They're impulsive. They want to get it done yesterday. And what I say to them is a little bit of experience. If you're writing about a chef, as one of them is, do you have a job in a restaurant? Are you washing dishes? That kind of, because you bring it all to the page, or you can bring it to the page. And if you're a good enough storyteller and know how to twirl words, those words can turn into a pretty good story. And you just literally identified that in what you just said about, hanging out with the kids for as long as you have. Now, I want to ask you before we end, are you working on anything else that you want to discuss?
You know what, I'm, I haven't even really been writing it, but I'm trying to work on a novel that is based, it is historical fiction. It's largely fiction. So it has to be a novel about my father-in-law, and my mother-in-law. My father-in-law was a migrant farm worker from Mexico during the Great Depression. And
Uh,
with all that's going on politically in the country, again, it reminds me, he lived the American dream, right? He came here when he was 4 years old. He worked, he slept on the ground, he lived like a dog to start with. And he ended up owning his own home, actually more than one, this kind of thing. He
yeah,
had a
the
family,
American
had
dream.
he lived the American dream.
Yeah.
And I hate the idea that we're like trying to take this away from people. It's what America is. But I have had to do a lot of research. And I know that they say, oh, you can get bogged down in research and you don't, then you never write. So it's problematic, right? You have to know when to stop. And one of my problems is like, I thought, well, I'll stop. And all of a sudden I'm writing, I don't, wait, could this have happened? And I have to go back in the research because I don't know what I want to happen if it actually could have happened.
Hmm.
So I'm doing that. But to your point of, just getting ideas and knowing things. I think, I other than that, I think, oh, I'm kind of dry. I feel like this downer because of the country. I don't have these good ideas. But things that happened to me when I was younger, and I have a friend, a really good friend who died after we'd been knowing each other for like 53 years. And so
That's
what
tough.
tight. We used
Yeah.
to backpack together, Girl Scouts together. And I think getting out into places like that you've been and that you know will strike the match for the thing. I went up, I was actually just in Palm Springs, so I took that tram up to San Jacinto,
Yes.
which was a place we used to actually backpack. But this, I was doing the old lady thing. I just took the tram and then I was there at the top of
Yep.
the mountain. Yay. But when I got on that mountain where we had been, all of a sudden, boom, I had a short story idea with her. I mean, it was like, wham. If I hadn't gone there, that story would not have come into my
Hmm.
head. And so I think just being alone too much at your computer, I will absolutely agree with you that sometimes the best thing to trigger stories is to get out in places where you're with and among other people, chatting and living your life and having experiences. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so for those who didn't go from high school to undergrad English major to MFA to, entry level author in their late 20s, there's still time. We're still writing good stories. They
Exactly.
may not be crafted as tightly as Jodi Picoult's, but we still can write those stories. And of course, continuing education. And I know I don't have to say that to you, Victoria, because you're a believer in it as I am. I'm encouraging writers, especially young writers, to get some more continuing education. One writer said to me on TikTok that she went to her first writers conference, and I've been repeating this story and I will continue to, that she went to her first writers conference. It was just a weekend conference, but she could not believe what she did not know about craft
Mm.
because where she was getting her craft was on TikTok.
Oh gosh.
Instagram.
Okay.
And you get a lot. Trust me, I'm on both. You can get a lot, but it doesn't, go to school, go to a continuing education. They're all over the place, online, etc. Or get yourself to a real writers conference. They're not what they used to be, frankly, but it's a wonderful community to hang out in, whether it's just for a weekend or a week long experience. We have the Santa Barbara Writers Conference coming up in June, and that's in its, I don't know, 50th year or something like that. But they're important for writers since there are 4 million books were published last year.
I
Not
know.
sold,
Yeah.
but published.
Yeah.
That makes me hyperventilate a little bit. And yet, younger writers, they don't even blink at that because they don't have a frame of reference. Back in the day, if 100,000 books were published by New York, that was a lot. And that
Hmm.
wasn't that long ago. So anyway, I give this spiel every time I have the opportunity to because storytelling it's an art and it's a craft and you have to learn it. And some of us learn it better than others. And the only way that you know is by reading others. I just got done, I study authors. And so Jodi was my latest. I mean, I've read 7 of her novels. And it's like, you get done with those novels and you go, ay, 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 never could I do that ever. But I can write my stories you
Hmm.
know. And she would be the first to agree. You write what you know, and you certainly have. And I delighted that we had this chit chat. And give listeners your Substack account name, and then where they can find Keep Sweet.
Okay. Oh, and I was going to say one thing about that drove a lot of people to the Substack, which I will tell you because you were asking about like the overall,
Yeah,
how do you find people? I wrote a thing about purity culture that was a memoir kind of a little personal essay
yeah,
that went super viral
did
on
it?
HuffPost and then BuzzFeed and Yahoo News and Google News and stuff. It went like
Yeah,
totally crazy. And a lot of people who read that purity culture thing, see, that's how they were interested in the idea, right, of this patriarchal society. And then they came and they got on a Substack. So it's,
That's how it grows.
put your writing in different places, right? That's the idea.
Yes. Do you put your
And
writing in enough places?
I think I tried. So,
Okay.
yeah. So my Substack is just called Be a Cactus.
Okay.
And I wanted to call it Be a Cactus because it's like cactus bloom and they have beautiful flowers and stuff. But you know what? If somebody's doing something you don't want, you got to also have the stickers. You
Hmm.
also got to have
Some
that.
protection.
Yeah, a little bit of protection.
Hmm.
And so it's just called Be a Cactus. So people who are on
Okay.
Substack can just search Be a Cactus.
Very
And as
good.
far as the actual name of it or the website address, it's just my name, Victoria Waddle
Okay.
dot substack dot com.
Very
Victoria
good.
Waddle dot
Say that one
substack dot
more time because my timer just went off.
Okay, Victoria Waddle, so my
Hmm.
name, dot substack dot com.
Good.
So,
And then
and
where can we find Keep Sweet? Amazon?
so yeah, you could find it like anywhere that you're just
Okay.
order a book. So if you're online, bookshop.org, Amazon, Barnes and
Okay.
Noble online. I mean, all these online places, it's just you just order it
And
and it
read
gets
it
delivered to your house.
and review it.
Yes, that would be fabulous.
Yes.
If
Authors
you
like
like it.
reviews, folks. If you're going to
Yes.
read it, even if it's only one sentence, a little review is appreciated. Victoria Waddle, thank you so much for coming on. Marla Miller talks to authors and content creators. I had fun. I hope you did too. And I will be posting this probably not until next week because we've got one more before you that we'll post on Monday.
Thank you, Marla.
Thank
Thank you.
you. And I'm pausing.